Okay, so I want to first say thank you all for coming today. And of course, thank you to our co-host, as always, the Rabbi Arthur Schneer International Program of Yeshiva University and Professor Ronnie Perellis. And obviously to our presenters and our participants. I do want to say that this is kind of a two-part series on this particular book, as we had some amazing contributors, two of which are here today, and three of which will be here on October 27th. For those who don't know, this is also a project that's near and dear to my heart because I am one of the editors and I have read this book so many times, backwards and forwards. There we go. We can all show our books together. So yes, so this is really quite an exciting thing for me today. And I'm really happy that there are so many people here to share it with us, and more people will be coming in. Before we do the formal beginning, though, I want to make sure that we point out that we have a really rich fall schedule filling up. We have some wonderful music and dance programs, a writing workshop, that was hard, and some wonderful New Works Wednesdays, as we've said. Next week, there's one on the Netherlands. We'll be commemorating the Day of the Jewish Refugees of Arab Lands on November 30th with a full day program. And Kickstart Reclaiming Identities, a new campaign. We're going to celebrate women on Eid al-Banat on December 5th. So please check out the website and our mailing, to register for our mailing list to stay updated. And membership is also available for 3-month increments. So we do encourage you to do that. So that's our little advertisement at the beginning. Now we can get to the real meat of why we're here. So the volume that we're talking about today came about because of a conference in 2019. I do have to add a little to our advertising because it was in collaboration with the Association Mamuna, and the OCP Morocco was the sponsor of that program. And I want to make sure that we understand it was Jews and Muslims together making this conference, and it was very exciting for that, and I'm very proud of that, actually. And so Mamuna is an organization started by Muslim college students in Morocco over a decade ago that wishes to preserve the memory of the Jewish history and culture, as well as enhance Jewish-Muslim relations within Morocco today. And to do that, American Sobriety Federation has been working very closely with them, and we continue to. So after the positive response to this conference called Uncommon Commonalities in 2019, Professor Jane Gerber came over and said, we really have to build on this momentum. This is something that needs to be down. This is something that needs to be for the next generations. And we said we're going to create a volume. We pitched it to academic presses, and we're very proud to have it here. And we then approached Professor Yossi Shitrit, who is a well-known scholar of Moroccan Jewry, as well as a linguist, mostly focusing on French, but also somewhat in Hebrew. And so we really worked together to recruit the right authors and have a rich volume. So as a joke, a historian, a linguist, and an educator walked into a Zoom room, and out came this volume. That's where we are now. So one of the important things in this volume is really that we have people of different disciplines. We have anthropologists, artists, historians, Jewish studies scholars, linguists, musicologists, and even a professor of law. It's important because it's not just a historical piece or an anthropological survey, but it brings together different disciplines to give a much broader picture of Jewish life in Morocco in the context of their Muslim neighbors. The interplay between different groups of Jews and the Muslim majority distinguishes Moroccan Jews to this day. As we have two historians presenting today and musicologists on October 27th, I want to at least acknowledge and highlight a bit of the Jewish studies research that's part of this volume. The rabbinical class was nominated by peers for a long time in Morocco. Under French rule, they underwent a Talmudic exam and were thus recruited to be a part of the government as well. And that was something very unique in Morocco, that the Rabbinic had government status as well, and a lot of their own autonomy within their own communities. This allowed for many groundbreaking rulings that allowed for more freedoms as opposed to the European counterparts, who often creating rulings in response to Christian missionizing or the Enlightenment. So in the book, Professor Westreich refers to halacha without anxiety as the most representative component of the Moroccan legal tradition, and the one that serves as a basis for all the other elements. For example, the rabbis in Morocco would force a dying husband without children to give a get to his wife, thereby avoiding the need for levirate marriages or chalitza. The idea was within the confines of halacha to allow people to live in society in the best way possible. Elimelech Westreich even points out that they were open to listening to doctors for medical halacha and women for inheritance and laws pertaining to women, things that you may not see in other societies. It was a strict rules-based society, however, it has an openness and willingness to bend the rules to the current needs, but never break them. And now I know you didn't come to hear me, but I wanted to give an overview. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Michal Ben Yaakov, who built on the known strong rabbinic culture and discussed how it established and cultivated the founding religious beliefs and ideological cornerstones that distinguish Judaism as a monotheistic system and maintains the memory of Eretz Yisrael and the hope of redemption. Her chapter, Traveling Between Place and Faith, refers to the holy spaces and aliyah in the 19th century. Dr. Ben Yaakov is a retired associate professor and head of the history department of the Ephrata College of Education in Jerusalem. Dr. Ben Yaakov, the floor is yours. Oh, sorry, before you start, I just want to note, sorry, I know I just gave that introduction, but please, everybody, you see that your cameras and microphones are off. As always, please do throw questions into the Q&A. If you can't figure that out, you can throw it into the chat and I'll be following it as well. And we will answer questions at the end, unless it needs to be inserted. So, and we will allow you also to open your microphones and cameras at the end. Now, without further ado, please, Dr. Ben Yaakov.
Thank you very much. I will try to do the share screen now. Are you with me on the share screen? Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to join in presenting this exciting new book, Jews, Muslims in Morocco, Their Intersecting Worlds. Centuries before the Abraham Accords, Jews and Muslims have been coexisting in the same geographic regions, their lives intersecting and shaping each other's, for better or for worse, depending on local circumstances. For both Jews and Muslims, space and place have profound significance, woven into their cultural and religious norms. This new volume includes several chapters dealing with space in Morocco, not only in geography and in history, but also in literature and language, liturgy, custom, and music. I propose here to examine the concept of space by juxtaposing perceptions of physical space and place, with which we are familiar, with the implications of space in faith, as well as faith in place, focusing on the Jews of Morocco in the 19th century. A Moroccan folktale tells of Rabbi Hanina Yogel, a rabbi and wonder worker in Morocco. And the tale goes, he had a great love for the city of Jerusalem and yearned to go there. But as he himself was not able to go, he saved money for a whole year and gave it to his father so he might go there. When his father came to Jerusalem, he found it was difficult to accustom himself to the conditions. And so after a short stay, he returned to Morocco. When he came back, he told his son why he had left the holy city. Rabbi Hanina was chagrined and said, "Oh, what a pity, father. It was not the climate that did not suit you, nor the fragrance of Jerusalem. Jerusalem needs the heart. If your spirit had cleaved to the spirit of Jerusalem, you would have been inspired by the fragrance of Jerusalem." And here there's a play on the words between ruach, spirit, and reach, the fragrance. The words of Rabbi Hanina struck deep in his father's heart, and that self-same year, he returned to Jerusalem, where he lived for the rest of his life. This tale clearly exemplifies how geographic place and religious beliefs can be intertwined and meshed. In fact, religious practice and perceptions of social and geographic place are as important in creating sacred spaces as are written and legal codes, and at times even more significant. The deep attachment of Moroccan Jews to Zion, Sion, the land of Israel, Eretz Israel, the Holy Land, Eretz HaKodesh, or in short, the land, and here I will use the terms interchangeably, have been studied primarily through the written corpus of legal and philosophical writings of Jews of the Maghreb. However, other aspects come to light when examining the interaction between the social and religious climate of various communities and the personal characteristics of those Jews who actually journeyed to the sites they considered holy. The love of Zion and the veneration of pious souls permeated their daily lives and created social legitimacy for geographic mobility, particularly for women. Changes in personal status were important in the migration decision and can be demonstrated, for example, by the many widows who participate in hilulot and pilgrimages to sites in Morocco, as well as aliyah, migration to the Holy Land, the ultimate manifestation of their love of Zion. Through the prism of geographic mobility, I will now briefly examine the interaction between concepts of sacred space and religious practice among Moroccan Jews, although the phenomenon is not restricted to them alone. I argue that popular religious beliefs and practices not only influence Jews in their decisions to make the difficult journey, but perceptions of holiness also determine their destination and help them cope with the difficulties that they encountered. This specific case study on the sanctity of space in popular practice and religiously motivated journey takes all three aspects to the extreme, as Moroccan Jews imbued with religious belief traveled well over 3,000 miles to permanently settle in the Holy Land, at the time a peripheral and underdeveloped area of the Ottoman Empire. Chinese-American geographer Yifu Tuan developed the concept of geopiety, the reverence for and veneration of a particular place. He emphasized the cultural and religious components of human actions, and in particular, the relationships between those components and physical space and place. Since the geographical works by Tuan and others in the 1970s and 80s, a spatial turn has reinvigorated the humanities and social sciences, and many scholars have found new avenues to study history, literature, religion, and culture. Perhaps nowhere is this more illuminating than for studies on Judaism and Israel. Although politically, the area was divided between 4 Ottoman districts in the province of southern Syria. However, 19th century maps present of the religious imagination of the country quite differently. They note, for example, the prominence of grave sites in Jerusalem, Hebron, Tiberias, Safed, and Meron. Indeed, these maps, as the tale of Rabbi Hanina, illustrate the interplay between space and perception and the inseparability of space from the relationships to it. Although sites mentioned in the Bible are held in special esteem, holiness applies to the land as a whole, with laws applicable exclusively to the Holy Land, such as regulations for cultivating the land. And in fact, this current year is the sabbatical Shemitah year. The basic precept of settling in Eretz Israel has also been enumerated as a separate religious commandment, a mitzvah. Interestingly, immigration to the land, aliyah, has not been defined as a commandment itself, but is understood to be a means to fulfill those commandments which can be performed only in the Holy Land. In Hebrew, aliyah, literally going up or ascent, expresses intrinsic merit and virtue, and not only physical geographic mobility, Migration in Hebrew is a different word, hagirah. As such, aliyah is both a physical and a spiritual means to attain greater access to the holy. According to tradition, this elevated level of sanctity promises the inhabitants of the Holy Land special benefits, including health, longevity, and easier entry into the world to come. Although I must add parenthetically that of these virtues themselves illustrate the gap and even the contradictions between the reality and the perceived notions of sanctity, especially in poverty-stricken, disease-ridden 19th century Palestine, in which the only sure attribute is the more speedy entry to the world to come. The fragrance and spirit of Jerusalem, rucha v'recha, disregard the actual physical traits. However, most Jews did not, and today do not, live in Israel. Several solutions were created to deal with this religious dilemma of not fulfilling commandments. One of them proposes that those men and women living in the land became emissaries of their respected families and communities, fulfilling religious commandments for them in the Holy Land in absentia. This mission not only added special status and sanctity to those in Zion, but also had monetary benefits in order for Jews living outside the land to participate in life in the land. They sent contributions to the holy cities, monies used to sustain the communities in their continually distressing circumstances. The funds collected abroad for Jews living in the Holy Land were therefore not conceived of as charity alone, but as a token of this participation. Shadarim, emissaries coming from the Holy Land to collect monies, were the functional connection between Moroccan Jews and the land of Israel. Over the centuries, the dynamics of religious behavior, geographic mobility, and access to perceived sanctity also created specific holy sites. Beginning in the 16th century, a mystical tradition developed within Judaism, the Kabbalah, primarily in the northern city of Safed and to a somewhat lesser degree in Tiberias. Among the Kabbalistic customs was the veneration of many rabbis and sages buried in the Galilee or reputedly buried there. The custom of visiting graves was considered not only an act of piety, but became a desirable form of behavior in order to commune with the departed pious and to request his intervention on their behalf. Over time, the grave sites themselves became sacred spaces. The mystical doctrines emanating from Safed found fertile ground in North Africa. Many Moroccan sages devoted themselves to studying the writings of the Kabbalah. Community members participated in ritual readings of its classic text, the Zohar, popularly believed to have been written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in Meron, near Safed, during the 2nd century. Traditional ties to Israel became imbued with mystical beliefs. The sparks of the divine gave every man and woman an active part in the coming messianic redemption. Safed and Tiberias became familiar to Moroccan Jews through word and song. Rabbi David ben Hassin, the popular 18th century Ha'itain of Maknes, about whom you can read in a different chapter in this new volume by Andre Elbaz, wrote piyutim in honor of Tiberias and Safed, and these were adopted in synagogue liturgy. This 1875 map, an adaptation of earlier works, was widely distributed, and particularly prominent is Sfat, with its, for Sfat, for example, with its graves of Rabbi Isaac Luria of the Ari, Rabbi Joseph Caro of the Shulchan Aruch, and Rashbi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in Meron. As a result, particularly strong ties, both spiritual and material, developed between the Jewish communities of North Africa and the Holy Land. Jerusalem retained its centrality in Jewish prayer and became a synonym for all of Israel and a symbol, but detached from the earthly city. But the Jews of Morocco felt an intimacy with the synagogues, cemeteries, and sites in Tiberias and Sfat, all clearly inscribed in their imaginations. Within normative Jewish tradition, interpretations differ based on the philosophical leanings of sages and the emphasis placed on varying aspects of Jewish law. In the royal city of Meknes, Zion was a vibrant factor in daily life. Rabbis in this city, as those from the noted Toledano and Verdugo families, emphasized the special sacred status of the Holy Land. They meshed it with standard traditional texts and local customs in their sermons, writings, and legal decisions, reinforcing ties with the Holy Land and encouraging aliyah. In the 18th century, these ties did not culminate in migration to a land fraught with earthly poverty, insecurity, and general neglect. But times were changing. In the wake of the Napoleonic Wars and the later French conquest of Algeria in 1830, piracy in the Mediterranean was eradicated. In 1831, Rabbi Yaakov Verdugo, for example, pronounced that travel to the Holy Land no longer entailed certain and great personal danger, and therefore no longer justified circumventing the commandment to settle in the land. From the 1840s on, there was a dramatic increase in Jewish migration within the country due to the economic, political, social upheavals taking place at the time, as well as by the periodic havoc wrought by drought and famine. From towns and villages and rural areas, Jews gravitated towards the larger interior cities, and from there, Jews streamed to the coastal cities in the hope of finding economic opportunities and security under the aegis of foreign powers. Others sought spiritual solutions to the mounting pressures. The Holy Land became a more viable option when steamship lines and communication links began to improve and political changes in the Ottoman Empire, including Palestine, were more lenient towards non-Muslims. The immigration of Moroccan Jews to the Holy Land increased dramatically, and hundreds arriving annually, especially from the traditional centers of Jewish life in the interior, rich in Jewish scholarship. Although this was not without pragmatic and ideological tensions. In Tetuan in the north, for example, the illustrious Rabbi Yitzchak ben Walid was pressured to make only a brief pilgrimage to the Holy Land in 1877 in lieu of settling there permanently, so he might continue to lead the local community in coping with the increasing pressures of modernization and rising population. During the same period of instability, alternative modes of religious behavior arose in Morocco, outside the normative practices of Judaism, and often at variance with Jewish legal code. There was a marked development in the growth of informal, charismatic social forces at the expense of formal, institutionalized elements, particularly in the central and southern towns of Morocco. Here I've co-opted from a unique 19th century oil painting I've taken from Algeria to show for one of the examples. These trends were repeated and intensified in the 1830s and the 1930s and 1940s as a result of increased modernization and the breakdown of the social fabric of the communities. Pilgrimages to visit saintly men and women, living and dead, and to make supplications for their divine intervention transferred Kabbalistic customs associated with the Holy Land to sites in North Africa and reinforced popular belief in supernatural powers. Sacred spaces were created by these pilgrimages and conceived to be similar but inferior to those of the Holy Land. This map from Issachar Ben Ami's encyclopedic monograph of Jewish saints in Morocco gives an idea of the dispersion of these hundreds of sites. Many of these Jewish sacred sites were perceived to have close proximity to Israel, irrelevant of the actual physical distance. Pious men, living and dead, were purported to have traveled from their homes and graves directly to Jerusalem, Safed, and Tiberias in a matter of hours. Such perceptions of distance and sanctity influence the destination of immigrants once they arrived in Israel, and are vital for understanding the migrations of Jews traveling long distances to lesser developed country with fewer economic opportunities, and were crucial for their ability to overcome their worldly difficulties. Aliyah provided women in general with a unique opportunity to achieve higher levels of sanctity and express their own personal religious aspirations. In their home communities, most paths were barred to them in synagogues and study halls. The sanctity of living in the Holy Land, however, has no gender bias. Women had proximity and access to the sacred, even if not equal, through non-formalized and non-institutionalized practices. Once widowed, women had increased freedom of mobility and could migrate to the Holy Land, provided they had the economic means to do so. This type of geographic mobility for women was not only allowed, but officially sanctioned as a good deed and even encouraged. Although external factors usually triggered migrations, the long dormant desire to go up to the Holy Land determined the overall direction. Their specific destination was eminently connected to their own perceptions of sanctity of place and its part in their daily lives and dreams. For those Maghrebi Jews steeped in the Kabbalistic tradition, having information or perceived information of life in the cities of Safed and Tiberias, their choices were almost preordained. As social factors and hometown networking snowballed, these destinations became even more attractive. In fact, Maghrebi Jews constituted well over a third of all Jews in 19th century Safed and Tiberias. In conclusion, what caused static religious ties and traditionally passive love of Zion to evolve into a radical, active expression of faith in the form of aliyah? The dynamics of migration do not break down into neat push-pull dichotomies. Neither do the experience of Jewish immigrants suffer neat distinctions between the heavenly Jerusalem and the earthly Jerusalem. The earthly was sacred and the spiritual was physical. The fragrance of Jerusalem, a state of the mind and the heart, and the spirit of Jerusalem, a physical place. Ever-increasing numbers of Moroccan Jews settled in the Holy Land in the 19th and early 20th centuries, as did hundreds of thousands who immigrated to the state of Israel after 1948. But those are topics for other lectures. In spite of the dissonance between faith and place, they have and continue to make a significant impact on the religious landscape of the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was, as we were discussing behind the scenes, quite enlightening, quite good. Thank you very much. If you read the chapter, it's also expands upon it quite nicely. We're going to move now to Dr. Noam Sienna, who highlights the professional healer overlap. It was common for Muslim patients to consult Jewish healers and Jewish patients to consult Muslim professionals. Jewish healers may have even received their training and knowledge from renowned Muslim healers. I'm going to let Dr. Sienna discuss who influenced who and how much, since that's part of his chapter in Invisible Neighbors. That's the name of his chapter. Dr. Sienna himself is a historian of the Sephardi world. He received his PhD in Jewish history and museum studies from the University of Minnesota in 2020. He's also a calligrapher and an amazing henna artist. Well, everything he does is amazing, but so I'm going to hand it over to the amazing Dr. Sienna.
Thank you, Dora. That's very kind, and I echo everything that Dora has said and that Michal said about this wonderful, wonderful book. What an honor it was to be involved in the process. I actually was deeply sad that I was not able to physically join the original conference in 2019. but this is really a wonderful group to be a part of, and the wonderful colleagues and mentors who are part of this project. So it's a great honor. One of my professors once told me that writing good history is like writing good mystery, in that both should start with a dead body. So in our case, the dead body is that of Rabbi Yaakov Wazana, a healer from the Western Atlas Mountains in central Morocco. The scene of the crime is the small village of Agwim on a hot day in the month of Tammuz, sometime in the summer of early 1950s. Early one morning, the local Jews were woken by three, and I quote here from the work of Dr. Yoram Bilou, three blood-curdling screams heard from one end of the village to the other. Rushing to the scene, they found the swollen body of Rabbi Wazana, soaked with blood, sprawled across the floor. The cause of death, obviously, at least in the opinion of everyone involved, was demons. And this is an illustration of how demonology, and I'll say more in a minute about what that means, was not a theoretical issue of theology or philosophy, but an aspect of reality that had material effects for Jews and Muslims in North Africa, even to the point of life or, as the case may be, death. We're going to return also to Wazana in a moment, but I want to give just some general context. This talk and the article, the chapter that it's based on, which you can all read at your leisure, illustrates some of the ways that demons and spirits and practices relating to them provided a space for Jewish-Muslim encounter. Drawing from a larger project on Jewish demonological practices in general, I suggest here that demons can help us think through the complexities of the neighborly relationship, one that involves a community of diverse and unassimilable others. And it's no coincidence that one common term in Morocco for demons was our neighbors. Now, let me just say, while I'm on the topic, a word about terminology. I'm using the English term demons to refer to a wide family of spirits and beings known in Hebrew as shadim and in Arabic as jinn or jnun in Moroccan Arabic. They are certainly dangerous, but not, as we see in the case of Wazana, but they're not necessarily the evil devils or demons that might be imagined by the English word demon. They don't have that kind of evil malevolence to them. But demonology in general is the word that I'm going to use to refer to the practices and beliefs and ideas that surround the world of the spirits. So I'm using it maybe in a more neutral way, not as negative as you might think when you hear demonology. We're not talking about, the devil here. So the historical importance of demonology in the Jewish world is well attested. The rabbis of the Talmud were not afraid to discuss the nature and origins of demons, which they did at great length, and developed a variety of practices and rituals aimed at keeping them away. While in other places, rabbinic literature records that people communicated with demons and attempted to work with them or control them, or even see them as sources of information, subjects of rabbinic law, or even companions. These demons were capricious beings who could be organized, understood, managed, and controlled through the authority of Torah and halakha. Jews in the Middle Ages were not only inheritors of the rich Jewish traditions of late antiquity, but also deeply engaged with developments in Christian and Muslim demonology. The majority of medieval rabbis asserted not only the reality of demons, but engaged with philosophical, legal, and theological questions about their nature. And of course, the Kabbalah, which we already heard about, left a deep mark on Jewish demonology, from incantations and formulae to the iconography of demons and even the physical presence of the book of the Zohar itself as a protection against these spirits. So that's on the Jewish side. The history of demonology in Islam, likewise, is deeply rooted in the core of its textual tradition, drawing on the descriptions of jinn in the Quran and the Hadith. In fact, the divine revelation of the Quran is addressed to both humans and jinn as kind of parallel communities. Islamic societies developed a rich corpus of demonological literature, exploring a wide variety of theological and ethical questions relating to this imaginary world that is sort of parallel to our own. And while the jinn are normally invisible and intangible, they can nonetheless enter the human realm in a variety of ways, both negative and positive, sometimes helpful, sometimes hostile, sometimes seductive. Encounters with the jinn could be a source of power, but could also lead to illness, madness, and in fact, the word majnun, as some of you may know, the kind of colloquial term for madness is, of course, related to the word for jinn, and even physical harm and death. So among Moroccan Jews, as we'll see in a moment, the practices and beliefs relating to demons brought together the jnun of their local environment with the shadim of classical rabbinic literature. And in fact, the terms jinn and shed were basically used interchangeably, which, so I'll kind of keep the word demon in English, but you can kind of think of it in any of those terms. But I want to be careful to avoid analyzing Jewish magical and demonological practices as simply borrowed from similar practices and beliefs among Muslims, a stance which unfortunately has a long historiography. In my work, in general, I take the position that context rather than content is the most salient feature of Jewish culture. So the emphasis on uncovering the Muslim origins of Jewish practice, I would argue, elides the ways in which these practices were actually woven into and drawing from the fabric of Jewish life and experience. At the same time, attempting to study the Jewish community as some hermetically sealed bubble would miss the ways in which Moroccan Jewish culture evolved for 2 millennia in conversation with its neighbors. So my goal is not to emphasize either the similarity or the difference between Jewish and Muslim interactions with demons, but to highlight how the world of demons was, for both Jews and Muslims, a site of encounter with the other, not only with their invisible neighbors, but also with their human ones as well. If I may quote the words of one teacher for the Alliance, Moïse Naon, he described the realm of superstition as, and you see the quote here, a perfect harmony between Jews and their fellow citizens. In his observation of the numerous beaches, grottos, and rocks where Jewish and Muslim candles burn side by side, Nahon acknowledges the realities of how Jewish and Muslim demonological and magical practices were intertwined, each relying on the presence of the other. The realm of superstition, as he calls it, was not only a result of Jewish-Muslim interaction, it also produced it. So with that in mind, let me give some examples, first of how demonology brought together Jewish clients and Muslim practitioners, and then the reverse, Muslim clients and Jewish practitioners. And as I said, our focus here is on Jewish-Muslim relations, but obviously many, and probably even the majority of examples of Jewish interactions with the world of demons would have occurred within the Jewish community. So we don't have time to talk about that, but there are many, many ways, and I'd be happy to speak about that in the question period, that of course, this is just one smaller subset of the larger world of Jewish demonological practices in Morocco, which happened within the Jewish community. So in some cases, it seems clear that Muslim specialists had unique skills unavailable among the Jews. Fortune telling in particular seems to have been associated with Muslims by Jews in the Maghreb, and you see an example of a Muslim fortune teller here who may in fact be working with a Jewish client or not, we don't know. Another instance where Muslim magicians were called upon to aid in Jewish life was in a ceremony of reconciliation with an offended jinn. So you have a spirit that you have a relationship with, you've offended them in some way. These ceremonies were known by a variety of names, including Hadra, Tsar, Salha, Rebaibia, and Stambeli. They were performed across North Africa for Jewish and Muslim clients alike when a possessing jinn was causing a serious illness requiring professional intervention. And the magicians and musicians responsible for these ceremonies were most often musicians, members of Sufi brotherhoods of sub-Saharan descent, such as the Gnawa or the Busaidia. While ordinarily Jews might have had sufficient ritual and magical knowledge to deal with their demon neighbors, in these cases, the severity of the illness meant that the additional power and authority of Muslim ritual experts was needed. To give you an example, in an oral history with Jewish women from the city of Constantine in northern Algeria, one remembered this salha ceremony as being led, and here I quote, by Black musicians who played rhythmic pieces of music, swirling around, hammering on their drums with metal hooks. Only they could take the evil spirits upon themselves. The mastery of the rhythms and chants and the ability to safely handle the trance and the interactions with powerful Junun was a highly specific body of knowledge which necessitated the involvement of these non-Jewish magical musical professionals. In Jewish memories, it was only these musicians, ethnically and religiously other, who had sufficient power to overcome the danger of invoking the world of the Junun so directly. It is also possible, we could suggest, that the situation of possession, which, in other words, a jinn that has already crossed the human-demon boundary to impact a human so seriously, itself facilitates a ceremony that is allowed to cross these communal and confessional boundaries. This takes us back to the figure with whom we started, Yaakov Wazana, and I should note that I'm relying here almost completely on the wonderful study by Yoram Bilou, called Without Bounds, The Life and Death of Rabbi Yaakov Wazana, in both Hebrew and English. I encourage you to read it yourselves. Rabbi Yaakov Wazana was born in the town of Asarag around the turn of the 20th century, a descendant of a venerated lineage of rabbis and saints. But after his father died in Wazana's childhood, he threw himself into mastering the profession of healing and specifically sought out Muslim sheikhs renowned for their ability to work with the Junun. According to Bilou, at the end of his apprenticeship with such a Muslim magician, Wazana was told to faithfully recite Muslim prayers and marry one of them from under the ground, meaning to take a jinniya wife. These conditions represent these two foreign worlds, Muslim and demonic, into which Wazana had to cross in order to obtain the magical power that he sought. And indeed, he did so, according to stories. Obviously, his identity was unique for its incorporation of the performance of Muslim prayers and other areas uncommon among Jews, including knowledge of the Quran and literacy in classical Arabic. But while the extent to which Wazana was to enter the world of the Junun was unprecedented, Maghrebi Jews encountered Junun in a variety of contexts. Just the long and perilous process of gaining full control over the demonic realm and the extreme marriage to a jinniya was almost unknown in the Moroccan Jewish community. His life story illustrates the general principle that engaging with the Junun was also an encounter with Muslim society and vice versa. Wazana was exceptional in the degree to which he was involved in the world of the Junun and the degree to which that involvement necessitated his liminal placement between Jewish and Muslim social orders, but he was exceptional only in degree. Many Jewish healers, magicians, and other ritual experts worked with Junun, directly or indirectly, and it may be supposed that beyond their Jewish clientele, these magicians and professionals attracted Muslim clients, not only through their own individual expertise, but also through their power as Jews. Indeed, as the only surviving indigenous community of non-Muslims in the Maghreb, Jews were the quintessential others of Muslim society. And so it is not surprising that just as Jews imagined their Muslim neighbors to have a special relationship with magical power and the world of the Junun, so too Muslims saw their Jewish neighbors. Jews have long been associated with magical power across North Africa. Many popular legends, for example, are attached to Dar al-Magana, a 14th century water clock in Fez, opposite the Bu Inaniya Mosque. The stories claim that it was built by a Jewish magician, perhaps even Maimonides himself, who is said to be the greatest of all Jewish sorcerers. Perhaps it was a clock that was silenced by a Jewish sorcerer. Perhaps two Jewish sorcerers were fighting over it. There's many versions of this story. As one early 20th century traveler concludes after summarizing 6 different legends associating Jewish magicians to Dar el-Magana, he writes, and I quote, "A Jew is always the moving spirit." This association continued well into the 20th century. In 1940, one anthropologist recorded that, and I quote here, "The Jewish sorcerer is still today literally besieged by a crowd composed almost entirely of Muslim women who suppose him to have more power than his Muslim colleagues." Similarly, André Chouraki wrote that Muslims and even Christians frequented the Jewish healers and magicians in the Mellah, in the Jewish quarter, suggesting that Muslims sought out amulets and talismans written by rabbis rather than a Muslim scholar because they were rarer and had greater value and power coming from this other community. According to the French doctor Émile Mauchamp, a qaid of southwestern Morocco, Aissa bin Omar, had recourse to a Jewish sorcière when he was imprisoned in Marrakesh, and she sent him a talisman containing a Hupi's crest and a written amulet, which he continued to wear at all times after his miraculous release from prison. To this day, the power of Jewish magicians remains a common belief in Morocco, even in the absence of most of its historic Jewish community. Just as one example among many, an American anthropologist recorded just a few years ago that many of the fortune tellers working in Jama al-Fna in Marrakesh today claim to be, and I quote here, "the daughters of mixed Jewish-Muslim unions, and so their spiritual power for seeing the future and working with the spirits is double that of other fortune tellers who can channel only Muslim barakah." So Jews, Muslims, and demons were all tied together by a web of practices and beliefs, each relationship both a product and producer of encounter with the other. Jews and Muslims each called upon magical professionals of the other confessional community, drawing on the associations between magic and foreignness that lent extra power to religious others to engage with the world of the Jnun. In each group, the practice of magic itself was seen as linked to the presence, sometimes literal, sometimes figurative, of the other. In some contexts, this led to Jewish-Muslim cooperation, as Jews and Muslims each believed the other to have special access to the world of the Jnun. In other contexts, the Jewish association with demons led to a demonization of the Jews themselves. In both cases, the operative paradigm for understanding both Jewish-Muslim relations and Jewish-demon relations seems to be that of neighborliness, an ambiguous state of encounter that grants each party separate autonomy while acknowledging their interdependence, carrying the potential for both conflict and cooperation. In the end, what are the Jnun? I can't tell you. Like the Jewish community's Muslim neighbors, their spirit neighbors played a complex and ambivalent role, sometimes friends, sometimes antagonists, sometimes doing favors and at other times causing pain, sometimes entirely understandable and at other times completely foreign. The Jnun may be intangible, at least for us as scholars, but for the Jews who feared, respected, and placated them, they had very real and material effects. The inexplicable symptoms of illness, or the equally inexplicable events of healing, the actions rippling out of the social afterlives of these events, writing amulets, offering foods, visiting shrines, or collaborating with one's neighbors. Encompassing all of these varying modes of existence and experience, the Maghrebi Jewish imagination was a nuanced perspective that invites us to think beyond the present and the visible toward a widened understanding of the geography of social responsibility. What does it mean to build an ethics of neighborliness that is responsible to the broadest set of others? What does it mean to build a community that includes the invisible? This question is only a subset, I believe, of the larger question of what it means to build a community of diverse neighbors, a question which today grows only more pressing and which the topics of our study can offer much to learn from.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sienna. That was actually summed it up so well that this is really what we're talking about, the neighborliness of it. There are no questions yet in the chat, so please do throw them into the chat or the Q&A. I am going to open now to allow people to open their cameras and microphones, so please do join us, and let me know if you have a question that you'd like to ask outward. If Professor Perellis or Professor Garber would like to say something, she joined us, although she hasn't opened her camera. So I'd like to say welcome and thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this volume, Jane.
Yes. I want to first off by saying these were two vista opening talks. I felt I was traveling geographically, spiritually, in all sorts of ways, psychically. But I'm really, thank you so much. I want to just start with that and showing connections, whether they be connections between Jews living in Morocco and the relationship to Eretz Israel, which for most of history was not the easiest trip, and seeing that, and then seeing almost the microcosm of the spirit world, and the realization of how intertwined that was in these Moroccan settings. So it's really, thank you so much to both of you. Dr. Sienna, I have a question about sources. What were the sources that you were working with? Were they, and what languages were you encountering? I'm really curious about that. I have questions about for Dr. Ben Yaakov also about sources, but they're of a different nature, but I'll wait. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, so sources, yeah, a lot of different sources that we can use here. So the first is what we might call internal Jewish sources, rabbinic responsa about, which you have to kind of read against the grain, because usually what you have is a case where you have a rabbi who says, like, don't do this, which sort of tells us, oh, people were doing this.
We're
so
doing it, right.
like Ankoa, for example, Rabbi Avram Ankoa writes in Zvachim Shlamim, this is a mid-19th century, about this terrible practice that Jewish women are doing, where they go out to the edge of town and they offer sacrifices to demons, and they offer, they sacrifice a chicken, and they say these prayers in Arabic, and pray for healing, and this is terrible, and they go into a trance, and there's music, and they go into a trance, and they have this communion with spirits, and it's very, very bad, and they should stop doing that, which is, from his perspective, what's important. But from our perspective, we say, wow, this is a really interesting testimony to the kind of ritual practice that's happening on a kind of folk level, and which shows he doesn't mention explicit Muslim involvement, but there are a lot of very clear parallels with this practice to both kinds of offerings, this kind of practice of leaving offerings for the Shnun, and also this kind of trance healing is very clearly related to the kind of folk traditions that are common in North Africa. So that's one set of sources, mostly in Hebrew. Another set of sources are colonial reports, mostly in French. This was a great topic of interest for French ethnographers. They were very interested in folk culture. They were very interested in what they saw as syncretism, and relating, actually, Dr. Ben Yaakov already mentioned the notion of pilgrimage to saints' tombs. This was a huge topic of interest for French colonial ethnographers, thinking about how Jews and Muslims are encountering each other at these shrines, what they're doing. And of course, the Alliance also took a great interest in documenting the kind of folk traditions of the communities it was serving, although with a slightly different tone. They were interested in recording, but also modernizing. So they were interested in sort of documenting these traditions in the hopes that they could document them and then let them die out and allow the Jewish communities of Morocco or wherever they were to modernize and become more scientifically minded and rational and European. So there's actually a great, in one of these ethnographies from the 1920s, there's a great anecdote where one young woman is talking about demons. And she says, there used to be a lot of demons that used to come into our city. I think this is in Rabat. So they used to come in from Saleh into Rabat, but they don't come anymore. And the French ethnographer says, well, why don't they come anymore? And she says, because there's a railroad now, and everybody knows demons don't want to cross railroad tracks because they're made out of iron. So the railroad blocks the demons from coming into the city, which is like such a fascinating fusion of the processes of modernization and the persistence and adaptation and evolution of these kinds of folk beliefs. So those are some of the sources I use. You kind of have to pull a little bit, from here and there and kind of combine them all together.
Susanna, you had a question?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
More really a comment. I think that the Rambam would have been rolling in his grave that people thought of him as a miracle worker.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too, as you said it, Dr. Sienna. That was,
Such a rationalist.
but that's how he's seen. Carolyn?
I have a question on the concept of the sorcerer. The Volksbeine group did a Yiddish play on the sorcerer, called The Sorcerer, from the Second Avenue history of plays in Manhattan in the turn of the last century. And there's a little bit of sorcery in Fiddler on the Roof. Could you compare the sorcery of Ashkenazi thinking and Sephardic thinking going along these lines?
It's a great question. I will say I'm not a huge expert on Ashkenazi demonology, but there certainly are some parallels. I think the main difference is that in North Africa in particular, and in the Sephardi world in general, the world of the Jnun is a very concretely defined sphere that is really parallel to our own, but the Jnun really exist as beings. Like, they have names, they have characteristics, they have, you can see them if you do certain things. And my sense is that Ashkenazi folklore was much more a kind of generalized sense of like, there's like evil forces out there, there's the evil eye, there's like kind of negative spirits, but you don't interact with the spirits directly in the same way that you do in the sense of like somebody like Wazana, like talks to the Jnun and like works with them and like marries one of them, even has children with her, or so the stories say. I don't think you would hear any kind of parallel to that in the Ashkenazi world. You really just have what are called apotropaic practices that are meant to keep demons away, amulets, offerings, hanging garlic over a bed, or whatever. So those are apotropaic practices, which you also have, of course, in the Moroccan world. You have, amulets, you have things that you hang over the crib for a baby, swords, peppers, whatever. You definitely have apotropaic practices, but you also have cooperative practices because you have the possibility of engaging with the Jnun on this direct level, which I don't think is true in the Ashkenazi world, but I'm happy to be corrected. It's, again, not my main field.
Jeffrey was building on that, and he said, is the practice of sacrificing chickens to demons an example of how kaparot crept into tradition?
I don't think so. I mean, I think sacrificing chickens is very common. Chickens are very, generally there are like a lot of chickens running around, so they're sort of the cheapest, easiest animal to sacrifice. So it's like, it's a way of like, so for kaparot, you displace your sins onto the chicken, and then if you want to make an offering for a demon, you can offer it. You don't have to offer a chicken. You can offer a plate of couscous. You can offer a bowl of henna. You can offer a little sugar lump, a sugar cone. It doesn't have to be a chicken specifically, unless the demon asks for it. But it's a way of engaging in that relationship. It's a way of facilitating that kind of encounter.
Let me, Dr. Ben Yaakov, a question about sources in your talk. The posters, those images, especially that one from Rabbi Ganbash from Istanbul with the steamer, was so great. So it just brought everything together. Where were those produced? What were they? Were they printed? Were they just people made them for? Where are they in life? And where, what was their functionality?
That's not really my area of expertise. I just use them more as illustrative to make the point. Buni Rubin, Richard Bunim has put out a book a couple of years ago on, I don't remember the name offhand, I have it on the maps of the Holy Land. And these were made for a variety of reasons. Some of them were made and printed off that they were supposed to help pay for the journey of the person who made the picture. Sometimes many of the pictures, especially the 1875 or purported 1875 one, you can see generation after generation of maps where one just happened to more or less copy the other and make some slight differences, whether it be in language or some of the pictures. They were distributed in a variety of ways. Obviously, people had to have money to buy them. Some of them were illustrated in order to be put in books. So that's not really my area. I've just used it to show that, but I have been told that there was, at the conference that was 2 years ago, actually one man stood up and said, oh, I remember we had the, that he was originally from Morocco. I remember we had that hanging in our house. So that they did have a wide distribution. I just don't know much about it.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have time for a few more questions? Is that okay? So, oh, yeah, you put it in the chat, but please ask it, Melech, please.
Okay, I have two questions. If there's not time, just answer one. Dr. Ben Yaakov talked about women not being able to participate in traditional Jewish scholarship, and so they would go to, they would see pilgrimage to the Holy Land as one way they could participate. There's also a genderization, it seems to me, in what Dr. Sienna talked about. So I was wondering if, to what extent did men participate in sorcery and magic in Morocco, in North Africa? And also, I think Wazana was referred to as Rabbi Wazana. So what was, I mean, was there not a theological problem with using Muslim prayers, and how did the rabbis in general view all of this?
Yeah, for sure. So just on the question on Wazana, absolutely, it was very contentious, and in fact, to this day, Wazana was seen as kind of the black sheep of the Wazana family. Many of his more normative rabbinic relatives, both in his time and decades afterwards, felt like he had gone too far and had transgressed the kind of norms of the Jewish tradition by being so engaged both with demons and with the world of Islamic thought and scholarship and prayers. For more on that, I would urge you to read Yoram Bilou's book, Without Bounds, The Life and Death of Yaakov Wazana, which I mean, he did all of the field work, interviewed Wazana's relatives, people who knew him in Morocco, and it's a fascinating analysis of his story. So I would direct you to that. The question of gender is also really interesting, and you're absolutely right that there is a distinction here in as is often the case in many realms of Jewish life. Jewish men in Morocco have much more access to the world of the Jewish textual tradition. And so when they are engaging with demons, they are thinking about them through the lens of how shadim are described in the Talmud, how they're described in rabbinic literature, using writing amulets that are based on texts from the Zohar or formula from Kabbalistic rabbis, permutations of the Hebrew alphabet. Whereas, women are much more likely to engage in practices like leaving a plate of couscous out by the door, or going out to the well and sacrificing a chicken, something that is more rooted in the kind of local household marketplace environment. But they both engage in this world, but in different ways.
I do want to point out that Khadija responded to the Jnoun part, and I believe she signed in from Morocco, that Jnoun in North Africa, at least in Morocco, are like a parallel world that lives with us. Some people have the ability to speak and get in touch with them, and so we have on the ground people telling us. I just wanted to point that out. And there's another question here about parallels between the Hasidic world and the Moroccan world, and I'm just going to mention that we're going to have to obviously do a talk on that because it seems to be of interest to people. So we will go on to that another time. I do want to say thank you so much for everybody who participated, and thank you so much to Dr. Ben Yaakov and Dr. Sienna and Ronnie Perellis and all of you who joined us. I've read this book so many times, as you can imagine, and I still am constantly learning things, and I appreciate all of it. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of the day, wherever you are in the world. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Drora. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
setting
very
this
much.
up.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
Noam.
night.
Thank you, Dora. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.